Today I have my nice colleague Rainer Hanekamp, and Rainer will talk about white label solutions. Hi, Rainer.
Hello. Hello, Manfred, and hello to everybody else outside there.
How are you?
Thanks. Fine. Everything's good so
Awesome.
far. Already a little bit nervous about the talk, but I hope this will settle down.
Yeah, no reason to be nervous. You know your topics. You did this several times. And I think we also discussed it before off stage that this is quite an amazing topic because there is no good official solution for this. And so we are all really looking forward to what solutions you will come up with today, what patterns and so on.
Exactly. Yeah.
Cool. So if you want to
Great.
share your screen, then
Yes.
I can give you the stage.
Okay. Thank you very much. So if you hear some strange noise that's coming from my printer, I hope that this will soon stop. You can see my screens.
Perfectly.
The slides, wonderful. Okay, then again, welcome to my talk about customization and white label solutions. It's more or less a collection of patterns. Before I start, I'd like to introduce myself. So my name is Rainer Hanekamp. I'm part of Angular Architects, and our main product is more or less the enterprise workshop, and I'm also deeply involved in the development of our testing and the NGRX workshop. I also have my own YouTube channel, which, to be honest, didn't receive any new updates in the last few months, but I'm very active in the other thing, which is NG News. This is an Angular newsletter as a kind of a video. You can subscribe to it on Twitter, and you'll get a weekly update about the latest developments in Angular. Yeah, and that's about me. And now about the talk. And I'd like to start with the definitions first, because this is always the issue that sometimes we might have a different understanding, although we are using the same terms. So let's get this right away from the very start on. So when I'm talking about white labels, what I mean is that, of course, this is we have multiple applications. All of them are more or less based on the same core application. And the only differences that we want to have are maybe that we want to replace a logo, maybe we want to replace some texts, some colors. Of course, the theming is a little bit different. And so more or less, I'd like to call it easy stuff. And when it comes to customization, it's a different story, because with customization, we are not just changing the logo or the theming or something like this. We really say from the existing functionality that we have inside of our application, maybe we want to modify the functionality, or we want to add new functionality. And even worse, and that's the hardest part, we want to do significant UI changes. So this is not just about the color or the logo, but this is when we say we want to completely replace an existing UI component with something else that looks completely different. So this is what I mean here then customization. And as the slide here says it already, it's much harder than the white label approach. And then the third one, this is something that I don't cover, but I included it here for completeness, is, you can also overdo, of course, customization. And there you have to be very careful because if you want to come up with a system where you can more or less change everything, then that's not really good. And maybe sometimes it is better not just to see the situation as you have one application and you try to reuse the same part all the time, but maybe you then just take a look at your application, you take the parts out of it that you say, yes, these are the ones, these are the functionalities that maybe I can use in other applications. And then you just see it as a set of shared libraries that you reuse in completely independent applications. So this is the last part, but again, I'm not going to cover that one. Okay, so what is it all about? Well, we could say that white labeling and customization is variations of an application where a minimum of additional code is required and we're getting a maximum of customization. That's nonsense. This will not work. You cannot say you want to be able to customize everything with a very minimal amount of code. This, I mean, you can try it, but experience has shown it's not a very good way that you should try. We can change it a little bit. What I would really recommend you is that, first of all, you should be aware, you should define what you want to be able to customize, and then you try to reach this customization with the minimum amount of code. So not trying everything, but really wait for it until the need is there, and only then do you make this element, this particular element that you want to customize, only then you apply customization to it. And this is the much better approach. So you should more or less know what you're going to do. Okay, and before we start about the use case, so I have already prepared an example, of course, and an example application. We have here this holidays application that I use in all of my talks, more or less. And what we want to do is we want to take this application and we want to create a second one, which just is based on the same code base, more or less. And we want to generate this nice page on the right side, which is not really white label because it's a completely different domain. It's about Austrian food, so names are a little bit different. So it's something I would even say it's already a more advanced white label approach, or maybe even already a customization. And this is what we're going to do. And as I said before, white label is more or less the first step, and that's why we start with that one. So what are the things that we want to be able to modify with this white label approach? I've already mentioned some elements. Here is a list of more or less all the things that you can really very easily customize or modify. Global styling, of course, maybe something of the container elements. So when you say you're entering your website, it's quite often the case that you have a side menu, you have a header, you have a container. Maybe you want to apply some changes there. Assets, of course, that's the logo, images, the fav icon. Environment variables, also very clear, very important. Text, of course, and injection tokens, so local ID or something like this. And also feature toggles, although with the feature toggles, we are already entering more or less the customization area. But it should be possible to turn off or turn on, turn off some of the features from application to application. And this is what we want to try to achieve. Maybe what we should not do. I have some three, I don't want to call them anti-patterns, because sometimes in very minimal situations, it might just do the job. But if we are talking here about use cases where you maybe don't just have two applications that you want to white label, but you have a lot of them, then maybe these things are not the best approach that you can come up with. But what we see here is that inside of our app component can also be in some other components that we are really accessing the URL, our location or the host where this application runs from. And then depending on this URL, we are just changing the behavior dynamically. This means that all our code, all the dynamism is part of our components. So everything is there. And the more applications we add, the more URLs we add, the longer this code starts. And as I said, it's very likely that you don't have these conditions inside of your app component. You will have it in multiple components, and then this is very hard to maintain. So try to avoid using that style. The other one, yeah, it's not so bad, but you can have build scripts. I mean, there are better solutions for that, where you say, yes, for each white label application, you have your own build scripts that will replace some of these files that we just discussed. Yes, it's a possibility, but again, there are better ways on how to do this. Again, this is more or less everything. With this approach, we try to merge everything in one huge application, and this is what I try to avoid because of maintainability reasons. And of course, what is also possible, and it's more or less the same as the build scripts, coming up with multiple profiles configurations in your Angular JSON. Yes, it works for 2, 3, 4 applications, but if you have more, then your Angular JSON really becomes much, much larger. And again, you want to avoid having this kind of central places where everything comes together. We will have one, of course, but then that one will be suited for that. Okay. So what can we do now? First of all, it all starts and falls with the right architecture. It is really like that. So you have to have the right architecture in order to be able to pull that off. And when we see our application and we say yes, and from that application we want to generate a variation A, a variation B, and so on and so forth. And the first thing that you have to make sure that you're getting your app module as thin as possible. So you have to make sure that you are extracting everything out of your application and extract it into feature modules, into feature libraries. So this means you should use NX, which gives you this possibility. And if you don't want to use NX, then you can, of course, also use the Angular CLI projects for that. The goal of this action is that you should really try to get rid or to minimize the amount of files that you have inside of your application directory. That's the key thing here. We need to make it as thin as possible so that we only have a limited amount of files there. This is the first step. The second step is then that we create something which is an app factory. So there might be different names for that, but in the end, this is something that contains more or less all the things that every application needs to do in order to start up the application. So this is the routing configuration, it's the services, modules, configuration parts, and you put this all into the app factory, which will again result in a very limited amount of code that stays in your actual app directory. And I think you can already kind of see where this goes to. And the next step would then be that you can generate really very thin applications, multiple applications, and they're all based on the same app factory. And in that regard, you have more or less everything that you want to customize, and sorry, not that you don't want to customize, but that what you want to white label inside of your applications directory, and only that, and everything which is not up for white labeling is parts are in the app factory already, but of course in the feature modules. This is where the real application is, and this is that you don't touch when it comes to white labeling. Again, remember the definition. I said when you want to touch the features, then we are talking about customization, which will come afterwards. But now we are still in the white label area. Good. App Factory. What does it do? I already said it. It is just generating the boilerplate code more or less for the different applications that we will then just generate. And there it's up to you what you add in there. Again, you need to know what you want to customize. And in my case, I already know that I will always have more or less the same routing system. I will always kind of have the same container. I know that maybe the landing page, the home page, that will be different. And there I just configure my app factory that it gives me the possibility to come up with my own home component. I will show it right away, but first I need to finish the slides here. And with the multiple apps approach, I mean, as I said, that's very good then, because you have just a directory where only the things are there that you need for white labeling. Every application has its own assets folder. It has its own styles file. It has its own environment. The Angular JSON, of course, also has a separate part for every application. So you can really individualize or customize it in whatever way you need it. From a development experience, it's also very nice because you can just serve multiple applications at the same time, of course, with different ports, but this is a possibility. Texts is more or less the same. If you're using a translation library, I would go with Transloco today. then again, they are coming from the assets folder and they're individual for every application. And in the end, if you say, okay, but this is, I need to do more than the AppFactory, there is now an exception to the rule, and I need to do something else that the AppFactory is just generating me, then you can always, of course, override the settings of the AppFactory, because the factory just gives it to me, gives it to the application, and the application can always decide if it wants to use it like as it is, or if it wants to change some of the things, just some of the things. Depending on or regarding the build time, which is of course also an important topic, it's also great, because the smaller the app is, the larger the rest of the application is that you don't need to recompile. So if you never have to touch the AppFactory and also not the feature modules, then with the NX caching functionalities, that's very easy. That's very fast to compile, because the compilation of just a normal a thin app module doesn't take very long, and you can just publish them very fast. And then at the end, also schematics. This is, of course, also a possibility. In theory, you could even say you generate a schematic instead of your AppFactory. I wouldn't do that. Maybe I would just create a schematic that just generates a new application and uses already the AppFactory, because what I don't want to do is, when I'm adding features, I will probably add them in the feature modules or in the AppFactory. And then when I have already code generated and I've already pre-generated code, I don't want to touch or write migration scripts for that. So I'm more or less of the guy that tries to prefer generic services over a code generation. But you can do it, of course. That's not the issue there. Okay, coding time. Not that I'm going to miss that. So we have here our application already. Where do I have it? There it is. Not that one. And so it's just the holidays here, as I have already said. And if we take a look at our code, then it's already all set up. So we have here our application. We have the eternal, which is the holidays page, our application, and I have already pre-created the other one, which doesn't contain so much. But let's just take a look at the eternal, at the main application itself. If I open it, you see that it just contains 3 files. That's everything. The rest is just there, just normal code that you get with every other blank Angular application. And if we take a look at the app module, you see already it looks a little bit different. First of all, it has just 2 declarations of the app component and the home component. Why the home component? Well, because this is something that was decided before everything started, that the home component always needs to be individual. That's why every application needs to come up with its own home component. The home component, by the way, is just this part here. In this case, it's just the text there. The rest of it, the side menu, the header, this is more or less, that's the container. The container is already falls into the responsibility of my AppFactory. And we see already that just it's very simple, actually. In the imports, we have our browser module that we need. We have default modules coming already from the AppFactory, and we also have a function that is generating me the default configuration for my routing, and that's everything that I have to add. Let's take a look how it looks like. So I've now switched over to the AppFactory, and well, you see here all the files that are in there. And this is just the default modules that we need to export. So we said we will use always Angular material. We will also use NGRX. That's why the modules are here imported. Of course, Angular, the reactive forms, and also formally module. This is NGX formally for our modules. So this is something that every application needs to have, and that's why they end up in the default modules. Then we had the default routes. And here again, it's just the normal routing configuration where my feature modules are already lazily loaded. and it's just a creator function. So it returns something, and it gives me access, it requests from the application the home component. Again, this is a decision that was done on purpose, because the home component always needs to be individual. Just a use case, how this would look like. And then, of course, we have all the other modules here for Transloco. And what we shouldn't forget is the AppFactory module. This is the module that is now more or less responsible for the container itself. So the AppFactory contains the factory component, and the factory component is the container, more or less. I mean, you could also call it container component, but I went with factory component because that's the main component that the AppFactory starts with. And you see here already how it looks like. Cool. So just a bunch of default configurations, factory functions for our various applications that we need. This is what the AppFactory does do in its core. And same for the providers. We have some default injection tokens here, and now it becomes interesting. There will be some values that will be different from application to application. Just the title, maybe you want to have an application code. We will definitely have different URLs, and we will also have something for feature toggles. Now, normally in Angular, the way where you put these configuration values is part of the environment. But this will not be possible because this environment file will be the values from that environment file. They need to be reused in all the different feature modules. And first of all, we don't want to give our feature modules direct access to the environment files. They're only there for the application. And second, when we have 10 different applications, then what environment variable do we want to use? In order to overcome this is the design pattern to come up with a real configuration service. So it's not just for white label. I would apply this in every application as well, just normal single application. And the way how this works is that this configuration class is a service. It's not an injection token. It is a service, and it is part of the shared library. There is one shared library which is called config, and there we have this config class. And you see, it doesn't really look like an Angular service because it doesn't have an injectable. It's just more or less the template or the reference class that all my feature modules can use to get the configuration. But the only place where this config class gets initiated or instantiated and also injected into the dependency injection is in the app module. And of course, in the app module, there we can access the environment and everything else that we want. But this is the way how the configuration gets into the complete system and is more or less accessible by everybody. And well, what do we do here? Just about the base URL, the auth URL. The feature toggles here are also very important because this will allow us on an individual level to turn on or turn off certain features. Of course, somebody in our application will take a look, will say, okay, if diary is enabled, then I will show it. If it is not enabled, then I will not show it, or something else. But this can also be, all of this can be configured in this single application. Okay, so this is the internal, this is more or less the initial application. And I have already created the other one, which is this gourmet application. And if I want to start it, then I should get an error, hopefully. Otherwise, it would be strange. Because I don't have so many things there yet. And what I miss? Yeah. So here we would start, you would just run ng generate application. It will just generate you an application with an app module. And then the only thing that you need to do is that you need to fill in the values in the app module. And that's not so much. So what I have to do, I have to provide my default modules like this. Then I also need to provide my router module with for root. There again, I'm using a factory function because maybe I want to override something. I want to give me this opportunity to make this very easy. So I could also use it outside of the engine module, tweak it a little bit, change it a little bit, whatever I want, and then I'll only afterwards insert it into the configuration. But here I say I want to go with the default configuration. Of course, I have my own home component, and I can save it as it is. I keep the default providers, don't need to change anything there, and the configuration is something that I also have already prepared. Okay, so the compilation worked. Let me switch over. I'm going to load it, and you see it already looks very familiar. The only difference is that due to the configuration, we are now accessing another base URL. This is what that one returns. And we also see here on the left side that, of course, the features are missed because I just disabled them. And well, I can now start to customize it or to white label it. So I go into my assets and I can say, well, that's not the holidays. It's more or less dishes, and it's not really book, but book a table or something like this. Of course, it changes. That one still stays as it was before, and I can continue. Of course, obviously, what I have to do is that I have to change my styling. So I have still the default styling there, and I'm going to override that one. So this would be that one, change completely the color and all that stuff. And it's already failing for whatever reason. Oh, wonderful. Why does it not work? Angular material pre-built, that should be there. Restart. If not, then I will leave it with the normal color. Unless somebody can tell me what's going on there. Angular material pre-built themes. No, it's failing. Okay.
Is it installed? Is this theme installed?
Yeah, I just copied over it, so it should be there. I tried it.
Okay.
It's not the first time that I do this. Maybe I just compare the file. If not, I mean, if it's just a theme, then I can leave it as it is. I think. Let me quickly check. Yeah. No, I just leave it as it is. Maybe I have a typo in there. Themes should be there. So, error module build fail body. Okay.
Oh,
something, yeah.
Do you need parentheses for import?
No, I don't think so. Wait a second. Maybe it's. Nope. Wait, I mean, I have the solution. It's just the styles CSS, so it should be possible just to copy it over from the solution branch, of course. So my apps, Gourmet Traveler, source styles SCSS. That looks different. Okay, sorry. Yep. This strange thing there was missing. Let's check it. Yes. So this is what I wanted to look at like. So we have here now the grayish style. Yeah. Maybe that's not the best layout, but nevertheless, you see that you can really come up with different colors very quickly if you know the right commands. Okay. And so in that regard, we could continue more or less just adapting it to our needs, changing the text, going into the assets. Of course, you have already seen that the logo here is different. And you can all do that because this is just a place, a single place where all the white label features are there, and you can just replace it without touching anything else, so any other application or something like this, because again, the functionality of the application is in completely different places. I would have also prepared a little bit of playing here a little bit with the router, but looking at the time, we also want to do customization. I'm going to skip that one, but what you could have done is that you just fetch the routing configuration there and then just come up with your own library, maybe where you say you want to override, you want to add a new menu item, which is already an existing one, like customers. You could come up with another one that is called restaurants or something like this, which would be the customers in the domain of this application. But as I said, I'm not going to do that right now. Good. So this is more or less, I hope we can all agree that this is not that hard. White labeling, when it comes in this scope, shouldn't be that hard. Customization is more challenging. So again, I said this means we are going to modify existing functionality, add functionality, or even significantly or even replace UI components. And so the customization now really takes place in the feature module. So we need to find ways how we can dig into these feature modules, manipulate some of the services there, but only if we are in app module 1, and in app module 2, we want to stay with the default one. And again, it's very important that you have a very good architecture, because otherwise this will be really hard. There is a huge difference when we say we are changing logic, which means we are changing services and just non-visual parts. This is one part of the story, and the other is that we need to change UI components. It's a different story, different approaches. And you need to make sure that your application distinguishes between them. So you have to come up with something like this. You need to have real presentational components that don't inject services, do something fetching their own data, but that just show something. And you also, of course, need to have the container components that don't show anything except calling the presentational components, but they are responsible for the logic. Of course, if we're talking about logic, then we shouldn't forget about the services, because they are key here. The services are the easy things that we can customize, and that's why we are going to focus on them, or why we try to bend our extension points when it comes to customization more or less to the service level. But this is the first requirement that you have to have, more or less. You really have to have this differentiation between a UI component and a container or a smart component. How is it also called? Yeah, and again, be careful. Don't invest too much in abstraction. Only do so much abstraction as you really required. This is really dangerous, because you have to do these abstractions in your core, in your feature modules. They only exist once, and every application needs to live with this abstraction. So you want to keep them as small as possible. Of course, it would be great if you know already what you want to customize. And yeah, the combinations, possibility of the combinations, something I will refer to afterwards in the summary. But these are our extension points. So we can say we can replace existing services. We can, with a trick, replace container components. The trick would be that we try to extract as much as possible into services and get away with that. When it comes to UI components, as it says here already, this is very hard. There are 4 different patterns, approaches that I want to show you. But let's start with the service, always with the easy things. Customizing services. How can this be done? So when we found out a particular service where we say this one should behave different in a particular application, so this is a service that we want to be able to customize, then it's very easy that we are following this abstract approach where we have an abstract class, which is the one that will be provided into our components, but we are hiding the implementation from it. So this means we will not have an injectable provided in root, but we will have an abstract service, which is the injectable, and the final implementation will then be defined by the applications. Or if the applications don't want to change anything, then of course we will have a default implementation. So again, the approach here is that we say, following conventions, if the application says I'm happy with the default configuration, then the application doesn't have to do anything, it just works. This is the thing that we always want to go for. And this is how it could look like. So when we say, yes, we have here a holiday service, we have identified the holiday service more or less, that we want to make this customizable. So in our case, the holiday service is the one that fetches data from the backend. Then we define it, first of all, as an abstract class. We also say that the find all is also an abstract method. And then this is key. We provide a default service for it. So we say this is the one, this is the default service, and we also provide it in root so that it can be overwritten, even if this is a lazy loaded module. And this then is the actual service, which does more or less do everything of it. So we see here it's injectable, but it's not provided because it will just take over the role of the abstract class. And this is the one that we see in our feature module. And when a particular app wants to override it, then it just needs to provide another one. And in that way, we can very easily override it. And I think I should already show you how to do this. Maybe not. This is here the overriding in the application, but let me just go there and show it to you. So this is the holidays application, the feature module that we have. We have here our default holiday service, as you've seen before in the slides. This is the one. This is the default configuration. It fetches something, and this is the one that the components think that they get. This is an abstract class. Now, if everything's fine, we don't need to do anything. But if, let's say, our Gourmet web application here decides that it wants to fetch them a little bit differently. I mean, it's just a very tiny change. I want to change the order a little bit. Then it needs to override it. So the way how I would do this is that I go into my application, into the Gourmet, and there I say, okay, now I have a new one. And now this is the question of, this is one of these challenges that you have when you have white label solution where you are stretching over multiple domains. Because what the Gourmet traveler would now have to come up with is with a service which is called holiday service, although it doesn't deal anything with holiday service, but this is one of the challenges that you need to solve. In my case, I say I don't want to call it holiday service. I want to mix it a little bit. So I'm going to call it the dishes services, because this is actually what I'm going to fetch. And I have already prepared some data. So what the service does, it doesn't fetch them from a backend. It has it already stored in, just a different behavior. And I'm exporting that one. I say export dishes service, which of course needs to implement the holiday service. One thing, first of all, the import isn't a good one. If we have the deep imports linting, we would have here a problem. So normally, you would expose the holiday service in your public barrel file so that it can be reused. But in my case, I leave it as it is. And what I can also say, I don't need to call it holiday service further on. I can also say it's the iDishes service or whatever you want to call it. So I say here, okay, I'm implementing the iDishes service. You will see it's not really working 100% perfect. because now the find all has again the holidays there. Yes, I can go on, do more or less the same thing again. When I say I want to import the holidays, that I want to rename the holidays again, that I want to use an alias for dishes, just to make sure that everything in these services is called dishes and not holiday. But I think that's just a detail. You will not be able to do it always, but if you can, you should maybe do it. In my case, I say I'm just returning an observable of dishes in this case. And since I said the difference should be a different order, well, and I just say, okay, just resorting here, where I say I have the dish 1, I have the dish 2, and then from the title, I do a local compare against the D2 title as well. Now I have the dishes service, injectable, of course, it's required, and it's mind. Our application still looks like this. So the Tafelspitz is first, and then comes the Palatschinken. And of course, I need to override the existing one with that one. So I'm going into the app module, and in my providers, I say, okay, this time I'm going to override it. I say the holiday service in the context of this particular application, it's overwritten with the dishes service. If I save my file, if I go back to my application, you see that it's changed. So it's not that the Palatschinken went away, it's still there, but it has now been resorted. So we have the goulash and the Kardinalschnitte first, which might not be the right order in how you want to eat these things. Okay. So this is more or less the approach that you can apply when you really want to override some of the services. You always need to, first of all, create an abstract class of the service. You come up with a default configuration, then you give your applications the possibility, if they want, to come up with their own ones. Container components, it's a little bit harder. With container components in general, I would try to extract the logic again that you want to customize into services, and then just apply the trick that we did before. This is the way how you can get away with it very quickly. But the hardest part is, of course, the UI components. I mean, you can take over some of the tricks from the UI components replacement for container components as well. But as you will see, this one comes with a lot of work. There are now different strategies for that. We have the generic component, we have the view container reference, we have the ng template outlet, and also web component. So very fancy words, sounds very complicated. In fact, it is, but that's just the way it is. The ng template outlet approach is something that I've taken over from Yunus Jaidi in a talk he did in 2018. He used there in the engine dynamic component from Alex Markiewicz. I think that's his name, right pronounced. But the point is, what Yunus did was more a white label talk for application where you have A/B testing. So this is more about when you have one application and inside of the application you want to replace components. Here in our case, it's more we have multiple applications, not just a single one. So it's a little bit different, but some of the concepts are still the same. But credit where credit is required. Okay. So I want to go through all these 4 very quickly. The first one is, of course, that we don't try to replace a UI component at all. We should try to make a component as generic as possible, make it configurable, so the component still stays the same, but we have the possibility to apply another configuration to it. If we want to configure our card here, so in this case, it's the dishes card, here it is the holiday card, then the first thing that we have to come up with is with a presentational component. This is very critical. In our case, I mean, we will see that most of the work now needs to be done inside of the feature module. And this is what I have warned you before. Don't overdo this, because you will have to apply all your changes, your modifications in the areas that are shared by everybody, by every application. Nevertheless, inside of my holidays, I have my holidays component, and you see here that this is absolutely not the way how it should be done. The holidays component has a service, has the holiday service, we know it already, to fetch the values, but at the same time, it's also responsible to show them. So if we are going to replace that one, we also need to replace the way how the data is fetched. And that's not what we want. And that's why I'm going to come up now with an own holiday card component, a configurable one. So I say this is the holiday card component. I will only use one. I will just use one file for it, inline everything. So this is here how the holiday card looks like. So I have more or less the material part, the template part in the component. And of course, the component gets now the holiday. It should display via the input. Of course, I also need to declare it. This is important. I'll say here holiday card component. And well, go away, yes. And inside of my holidays component, I can now very easily replace it. I just need to say, well, this is now the eternal holiday card. We are still, of course, doing here the async part, and I just use the input, and I can let go of the rest. I think I also have to do some changes to my styling there. So that should be it. Let's go over to the application. Looks like it is still working. Very good. Yeah, that looks a little bit different. It doesn't matter. And now I need to make it generic. I need to make this holiday card component configurable. In order to do this, I can, of course, come up with multiple input values. But since you might already know where this goes to, we will have to come up with an own configuration file, which we want to inject into the dependency injection, and then give again the applications the possibility to override them. So what I'm going to do is that I say I want to have a holiday card config TS, which looks like this. So I have three different options. I can define where I want to put the book placement button. I want to define if I want to show more info, and I also want to define if I want to actually show the description or not. And my holiday card now, of course, needs to change. So first of all, it is getting the configuration as an input, like this. And so I need to do here the check as well. And then, of course, I need to adapt it a little bit to the configuration that I have added here. So I'm going to overwrite this more or less. And you see what have I done? I have added here a button which is only shown if the book placement is on top. What else do we have? We have an optional config show description, and we also have a show more info if it is really required. So, and now, of course, we need to go back into our holidays component, because at the moment, nothing will work because configuration is missing. We need now to provide a default configuration. Again, the same approach that we have seen before, now just applied to the generic UI component. And well, I will have to come up with my own holiday config, because maybe I want to come up with certain with other configurations later on. So I call it like this. So you see already the common pattern. It's a service provided in root, an abstract service, which just has the card config at the moment, and it is providing a default configuration for it. So we see here, yes, show more info is false, show description is true, and the book placement is always at the bottom. That's the right one. This service, this configuration, of course, now gets injected into my holiday component there. Holiday config, public. Now I can go into the template. I can say, well, we don't just get the holiday, but you're also getting the configuration that I have for you. Save it, go back. Also showing again. Now I say, wonderful, but I want to have a different configuration for my cards in my Austrian food thing. Maybe I don't want to have the description. I only want to focus on the images, maybe on the title, and the book table should be on the top. Again, the UI component needs to provide this customization, and as it does, we are lucky in this case. So I go to my gourmet, and again, I say, well, just add a new one. Sorry. Add module in my gourmet traveler. And there I say, yes, I'm going to override the holidays config. This again, you see the imports don't like it, but you shouldn't mind that. We should place it into the index. But for now, let's leave it as it is. And I'm going to say I want to use a value that I'm going to create now. I say this is the holiday config. And I say the card config should be that we have the description, false, show more info, also false, and book placement should be on the top. And I'm overwriting it with that one, rerun it, and if I go back, we can see that the new application has just taken on the new configuration, and the old one still has the original one, more or less. Okay. This is the generic approach, but of course, this will not be possible all the time. First of all, I mean, the layout, let's look at it. It doesn't look nice, but that's not the point here. You will have situations where you say, this is not enough. I have my own UI component. You need to replace it completely, get rid of that one, and use my own one. And if we want to do this, then we need to apply, of course, dynamic loading techniques. And there are two of them. And the first one is with the view container reference, which is, I think, more or less the more common one, the more known one. And the other one requires a library. Let's put it like this. But if I say I want to make it completely dynamically, I don't want that my holiday card component knows, that my holiday component knows what component it should insert for the card. I want to keep this completely dynamically. Then I say, well, there is a UI card, first of all, okay? So I need to have a view child inside of my component. I say, yes, I need to look it up because usually I just make a typo there. So I say here, well, there is a view child. It's the UI card. Is it the right one? Yes, it's UI card. And what does it have? It read view container reference of type. It is there from the very beginning. And I just store it here in view container reference, but it can also be undefined. Okay. What I'm going to do now is that I want to try that I need to load the default one, which is the holiday card, the normal one. The only problem that I have now is that I have, of course, multiple cards, and I don't want to go that path. I don't want to come up with multiple dynamic components. So what I'm going to do is that I will generate a holiday cards component, which will do the iteration of the holidays internally. But it still will be a presentational component because it will get all the holidays via the input. So, but since, now let me just start with the holiday cards component. Like this. So you see already where this is going to. There's an interface that I need to implement. And the way why there is now an interface for this holiday cards component is, of course, that I say, well, I'm giving you the possibility to replace it with a different one. But I, as the container component, I have to be sure that you have an input, that you have a property holidays, where I can pass on the holidays, of course. And of course, I also want to have the selected event, because I need to know if somebody has clicked on it, because then I need to do something else. So that's why the feature holidays defines an interface for that one, which needs to be implemented, of course, by all the potential replacements. And I'm going to create this interface in its own file. So I say this is the holiday card component interface TS. And where is it? There it is. Looks like this. Shouldn't come as a surprise. You can import that one, please. Thank you very much. And the input output as well. Thanks. All right. And of course, we also have to import it into the module. I think this goes without saying. So holiday cards component is now declared in our holidays feature as the default one. What am I missing? Well, quite a lot of things. I have to load this, of course, now. So what I'm going to do, inside of my holidays component, I say ng on init. I say this, and of course I need now the view container, not the view container, I need the component factory solver. By the way, this is still on Angular 12, so that's why I still have to do it in the long way. So I have here my component factory resolver, there it is, what this might look like. So I say resolve component factory, and I say that I want to use the holiday cards component for the beginning. Say this is the component. And this. The next thing is that my view container reference, my UI card, needs to be cleared. If it is already there, just to make this a little bit easier, let's see if this thing is undefined, then I'm throwing an error. UI card not available. I don't need the question marks here. And then I say from my UI card again, need to create the component, of course. Say holidays cards component. Not really, because I want to already say this is the interface that I want to do, that I want to use. Default holiday cards component interface. Put it. Thank you. And I just pass on the components. Okay. Do I have everything, something else to do? Let me quickly check. I think for the beginning, yeah, of course, I need to load the holidays. And here, of course, I need to use a subscription because, yeah, I can't apply the async pipe here. So I need to say find all. I say subscribe to them. I'm getting my holidays. And then I'm just inserting them into my components, not like this. Sorry. We'll call that one component ref. Instance, holidays, apply them. Okay, let's check. Well, this looks good. This looks also good. So it looks like it has been called. So the default dynamic loading is now working, of course. Maybe I want to change it now that I make it configurable, because that's actually the primary reason why I have actually used that one. And the way how I can do this, I have already my holiday card component, my holiday card config, sorry, that one, holiday card, holiday. And I have to say, well, the card component is something you can also provide me. And this should be of type, because we want to be type safe, holiday cards component interface. And by default, what is it? It is the holiday cards component. Card component, abstract card component. Did I miss something? I don't hope so. What's the problem? Required is card component in default holiday config. Here so card component. And inside of my holiday cards, holidays component, I need, of course, to use now the one coming from the configuration. So yes, I don't want to use the holiday cards component, but I want to use from my config, I want to use the card component. That's the one. Save it. And of course, it goes now in the same way as I did before. Via the app module, I can overwrite it. So I go back into my app module, my gourmet traveler here, there. I'm going to override it in my holiday config. Here it tells me already, look, you are missing the card already. And let me quickly look it up. View container reference. Yeah, it's the dishes component. No. Yes, I can reuse that one. Also needs to be there in the yes. Then I just say, well, the card component is, for me, it should be the dishes component. Now it should be working. Although it's missing an interface and import, yes, I believe you. Choose the right one. Save it. Everything turns green. I go back. Gourmet Traveler is shown. You see it looks completely different. It is now using the very primitive layout, so to say, no Angular material, just native one. And of course, the important thing is that the other applications stay untouched. And yeah, I'm already out of time. The problem with this approach is, I mean, it's working first of all, but the problem is that there's few container references, these components that we dynamically load, they are missing some features. For example, they are not running the on changes. So here I have the on changes, and I mean, we don't know if we need it, but if we are talking here about a lot of applications, a lot of bot customization applications, maybe, very likely actually, there will be some components that will rely on the availability of the ng changes. So if I say here I have a console log, I just do something and I go back to my console, then I see the ng changes is not really working. The problem is, although it's a good solution, maybe if you are 100% sure that this is already the end of your component tree, that they don't need any ng changes mechanisms, you can get away with it. But the optimal solution is something else, and that one goes with the ng template outlet. And that is hard a little bit to implement, and that's why there exists actually a a library for that. And this library is called ng component dynamic. That one. And this allows us to come up or to come up with a wrapper component, which is this, where do we have it? This NDC dynamic, where we can just define the class, the type of the component that we want to insert. And then we can also react on input output. And that one makes sure that also the engine changes, for example, works 100%. And you see already the code for that is not that much. It even makes our code smaller again, although it comes with more functionality. So that's why I'm going to implement that one as well. And I would say then we call it a day. Good. So I go back into my holidays component. This is more or less the central part. And what I have to do is that I say, well, again, I have some kind of a div. And inside of this div, I have to say now NDC dynamic. Yeah. And need to define my component. This is NDC dynamic component. That one wants to have the type. I have it already. It's the card component. So I don't need to do anything else. And of course, now the engine NDC dynamic component needs to know how the input value or what the input values will be. And for that, this looks a little bit strange, but that's the way how it works, is that we can say, well, there are the inputs, the NDC dynamic inputs, and that one wants an object literal where the properties are more or less representing the input from my card component here. So this means I need to come up with an object literal that contains a holidays property. Should be easy. So I go back to my component and I say, okay, if this is what you want, then I'm going to create you an input. I say these are the holidays. Should be an holiday array. This is the input that you want, of course. Type by default, it's empty. And I'm going to fill that one now. And I say, well, actually, I can get rid of that. Say holiday service, all, subscribe, holidays. I can even use the async pipe if I want. And say this input, holidays are becoming, getting now the holidays like this. There's still an error. Yeah, of course, I was expecting that. Inputs is missing in the template. Looks better. Compilation works. Let's go back. Nothing is in there. UI card not available. Yes, because I'm not using it anymore. Why do you think you need the UI card? Ah, yeah. Yeah. Now you see it's there. Hint. You also see the ASDF. This is the console log that I have entered for the engine changes. That one is also there. So this works. And here again, we have the same thing. But of course, for the default holiday card, I didn't add anything to the engine changes. That's why it's not showing up here. For the output, it works more or less in the same way. So my dishes, for example, the dishes component has the holiday selected output. Actually, the other one has it as well because we have defined it in the interface. This is why I actually made an interface that the inputs and the outputs are always the same. Otherwise, it would be a nightmare. And I can access these events more or less in the same way. So I say here, well, also for the same is true for the outputs. I say holiday selected. It's a function that's getting called. It's of type holiday. Sorry, this is not of type holiday. It's of course an event emitter. Here about an output, and that one gets it. I'm not sure if this is the right one. No, I'm missing something. A selector, holiday selected is a function. It should give me the event emitter, I think. If not, I need to look it up, but server subscribe. Log clicked on holiday title. Okay, yeah, prettier would be fine. Yes, I need to, of course, add it here as well. So I say NDC dynamic outputs. I add my outputs. Now I'm curious if this really works. Let me check. Yeah, AirSubserver is not a function, yes, so this is what I was afraid of. Let me quickly check that one. So, that's in the feature, holidays, holiday cards. Oh, there it is. Yeah, damn, I don't see it. That's not so good, but we have the documentation, of course. It should be there. So output on something, it's type alert. Okay, I don't know why I ever thought that it would be different. Okay, then this would mean that I have to change it to holiday selected. It's getting the holidays. That's it. I think I do it the other way. Should be a holiday. Okay. You clicked on Gulasch, you clicked on Kardinalschnitte. Yeah, you can't see it, it's very small. You clicked on Dauberspitz and whatever. Okay. So this is more or less the way how it works with really replacing UI components with the view container reference approach, or the approach with this Angie dynamic component library. You see that it's not very easy. So there is quite a lot of effort behind that. But again, you don't want to apply this to every component that you have in your application, only to the ones where it really matters. And the question is more or less, when you see that you are reaching a stage where more or less every component needs to be customizable, then maybe it's better not to come up with a huge abstraction core application, but maybe just go the other way that I explained in the beginning, where you say then it's not a customization anymore, but then you have just a bunch of multiple applications that share some of the common libraries together, but they are all individual. So you don't go into the generalization area. You're going more or less into the opposite one. And that's already it. So the web components, I don't think I need to, I hope that I don't have to show them, but in the end, this would mean you have, again, via the configuration, you provide a path for a particular web component. Your container component is loading this web component. Of course, it needs to have the same custom name, more or less, otherwise it will not really work. This is another approach, which is of course possible. And then what you can, of course, also do is that you can replace UI modules completely with something else. So this is more or less the last resort, as it says here. When you say, this is so much, I need to do so many UI components, you can come up with an own UI library. It can be a UI library inside of your feature module, feature domain. It can also be a UI library in the shared space. And then you go into the tsconfig, you use a script or something like this, and you just replace the alias or the path of this UI library with something else. You call the compiler, and as long as the interfaces and everything is more or less the same, you can very easily replace that one as well. But again, this is already last resort. Maybe for cross-platform use cases, yes, it might be a possibility, but yeah, be careful. Yes, and that's more or less it. I think this took quite some time, more than 1 hour, far more than 1 hour. First of all, you should only make these things customizable that you really want to be customizable. White labeling should be very easy with the AppFactory approach. Again, you need to make sure that the app is as thin as possible, which means everything that is stable, that stays, needs to be extracted into other libraries, feature modules. The logic can be abstracted with abstract services. You always provide a default service, and then you give your applications the possibility to override it via the dependency injection. And we are using this approach also to customize the UI. So the configuration value also for the UI, when it comes to generic components, we can include the input values that make up the generic component into the configuration, as we have seen. We can also dynamically load components. This would mean that in the configuration, we need to add the type of the UI component. We can do this in 2 different ways. We can use with the view container reference or with the ng template outlet. In this case, with this library here, and in the end, web components are always a possibility. And never forget, which I think is also very important, if you're a startup and you have a huge customer that says, okay, I want to use your application, but you need to apply these and this change, be careful. Be very careful. I have already seen this quite often where it really failed. You don't want to tweak your application to the specific needs of one particular customer, even if it might be a famous brand and also give you a lot of money. Maybe it's better if you just mix things together. For the majority of your customer, you're going with the white label approach. And for this big one that needs to have everything customized, you just create a separate application where you can use some of the libraries in a shared way as we would normally do it inside of a monorepository. But don't let that the majority of your customers needs to deal with the customization of this big company. So yeah, this is something that I wanted to say as well, because I've experienced this lately. Okay, and that's it from my side. I hope some of you are still there. Maybe there are some questions, and I am stopping my screen sharing and switch back to Manfred.
Yeah, awesome. So thanks, Rainer, for this awesome talk. It's really a nice approach, and it also gives us some theory that gives us hold. So I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
So are there any questions? If you have any questions, feel free to write them into the chat. We will be happy to answer them now.
Nice approach, wouldn't generic when it comes to renaming holidays. Okay, there were some discussions I see.
Yeah.
Also about the Palatschinken. Nobody asked from Germany what the Palatschinken is. Interesting.
It's a Pfannkuchen, isn't it?
Yes,
or is Pfannkuchen the right term? I don't know.
Yes, it is. I spent half a day wondering what the Pfannkuchen will be, because I was once in Germany and they said for dinner we will have a Pfannkuchen, and I thought this was a cake, and I thought, okay, then I just need to eat a lot for lunch. But then they came up with the Palatschinken, and I said, oh, maybe I should have missed lunch and should serve the hunger.
Cool.
No, looks like everything's clear. When part 2? Which part 2?
Yeah, so people are looking forward for more. So yeah, perhaps we do another talk on this or other topics, of course.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Manfred, you also tweeted it today. The thing is, there is no real solution from the framework itself. So if you're opening the Angular UI documentation, you don't find there any information. So you see, maybe they have not particularly designed the framework in order to do this. And you saw, I mean, what I presented is more or less a bunch of different strategy of different approaches that you need to apply. But there is no clear you do it exactly like this, because this is how the framework wants you to do it. You're very free in that regard.
Oh, here we have a question. For the UI card, could we instead create an injection token with a factory function that would conditionally return a specific component type?
Yes, why not? So I went with the configuration object because most of the time you have multiple things that you want to configure. So it doesn't. So in my situation, I said I want to have this configuration object that lists me all the properties where I know, okay, I can override this. These are the things that I can customize, and this is the way how I prefer it. Of course, if you say the holidays feature provides 10 different injection tokens, yes, would also be possible. You just have to be aware that you have to write a little bit more in the app module when you're doing heavy customization. So maybe the code is shorter when it comes to a large configuration object. Of course, for the configuration object, maybe this is something I didn't say. You might also provide the default values so that every app module, when it wants to override the configuration value, doesn't have to come up with values for all the properties. Maybe I just say this is the default configuration, and you just take the one that you only want to override. So then maybe I would say, okay, I want to override the UI card component, but I want to keep the default value for another component, which also might be customizable.
Cool. Yeah, I think there are no further questions. So one more time, Rainer, thanks for this awesome presentation. Thank you all for joining, and yeah, see you around.
Goodbye. Thanks.
Bye-bye.